我想问您一个问题，就是当今世界提倡共同但有区别的责任，那请问在气候变化的领域，中美共同的责任是什么？有所区别的责任又是什么？谢谢。
Are there like viewpoints similar to ours when it comes to climate change?
当前中美两国在可再生能源技术领域都有较快的发展。按照当前的发展水平，您认为中美两国是否有望实现各自的碳中和目标呢？
What plans they have to partner with the United States to battle climate change?
您认为美国和中国在这个题目上有过合作吗？
Addressing climate change is the shared mission of all countries, but developed and developing countries have different responsibilities. A cartoon vividly describes this scenario. A lanky man in ragged clothes is cooking over firewood. A person who drives a large displacement luxury car points to him and says, "What an enormous carbon emission! Your cooking is causing global warming." I think we must take an objective and a scientific approach to emission reduction responsibilities. Development is the right of everyone in every country. Developing countries need to develop their economies and improve people's livelihoods. Their people have the right to live the same lives as people in New York, San Francisco, or Washington. On climate change, they deserve more understanding and support from the developed countries. We cannot ask a man who barely has enough to eat to go on a diet and lose weight. While considering the needs of development for the current stage, we also need to look back into history. From the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the mid-18th century to 1950, developed countries emitted 95% of the total carbon dioxide. From 1950 to 2000, they still account for 77% of the total emissions. That's why developed countries should shoulder more responsibilities on climate change and fulfill their promises of providing financial and technological support to developing countries. As main actors on climate change, both China and the United States should first rely on themselves to fulfill their nationally determined contributions. This is just like students from different grades will have different test questions. But both countries should answer their own test papers well. At the same time, what matters in the test of climate change is the total scores of all students, not the score of just one student. Tackling climate change requires persistent efforts. Countries should have long-term and stable policies. The US is a top student, but it also has a record of skipping classes and withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. If it wants to score high in future tests, it should not skip classes or hand in its homework late anymore. China will strive to peak its carbon dioxide emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. Moving from carbon peaking to carbon neutrality takes the United States 43 years, but China has set a target of 30 years, which means that it will experience the world's most intensive carbon emission reduction. To achieve this goal, as a developing country, China needs to pay greater prices and efforts than the United States. We have closed and will continue to close energy-intensive, high-emission factories. For example, between 2016 and 2019, China reduced its steel production capacity by more than 150 million tons at the price of 280,000 steel jobs, which exceeds the total number of jobs in the steel industry in the United States, the EU, and Japan combined. But still, we will honor our promises with real actions. In terms of fulfilling its commitments and targets, China's carbon emission intensity in 2020 dropped by 18.8% from the 2015 level and 48.4% from the 2005 level. This means that cumulatively, China avoided about 5.8 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions. By the end of 2020, China had 220 million hectares of forest and over 9.1 billion tons of forest carbon reserves. We have also formulated a detailed roadmap towards carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. And we are vigorously developing clean and renewable energy while reducing coal use. By 2025, the share of non-fossil fuels in total energy consumption will reach around 20%, while carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP will drop by 18% compared with 2020 level, laying a solid foundation for carbon dioxide peaking. Addressing climate change requires close cooperation among countries, including China and the United States. We have issued a joint statement addressing the climate crisis, reiterating that we will strengthen cooperation and jointly contribute to the global response to climate change and work together to keep the global temperature rise below 2 centigrade and strive to limit it to 1.5 centigrade. We are also working together for a successful COP26. Chinese and American scientists can carry out joint research in low carbon technology, green energy, and other fields. The two sides established a clean energy research center before, and we have a huge potential for cooperation in electric vehicles, renewable energy, green finance, and the digital economy. For example, China has a complete industrial chain in equipment manufacturing for wind power and PV power generation, and its output of PV cells and modules ranks first in the world. These are areas where our two sides can effectively cooperate. We can also jointly help those countries that are vulnerable to climate impact and carry out third-party cooperation to improve their capability against climate change. Climate change is a highlight of China-US cooperation that leads the direction of global efforts. We hope that our two countries can take the COP26 as an opportunity, bear in mind the interests of all mankind, rise above the political microclimate that hinders our cooperation, and lead global efforts to counter the warming global climate.